So they go between your ribs, like just from one rib to another. And internal intercostals, the same thing. They're just deeper. But yeah, they're like here, between the ribs. They're involved in breathing, expanding your rib cage. Yeah, so did anyone come up with a easy way to remember the difference between those two? The origin and the insertion? Which one moves? So the insertion, that's where the muscle attaches and there's movement. And the origin is the part where it stays stationary, basically. That's a way to think about those. Yep. So your gastroc, who can show us their gastroc? So that's your big calf muscle in the back there. So your gastroc there, and then your TA, your tibialis anterior, is the muscle kind of on the front of the lower leg. Gastroc's a lot bigger, obviously. Alrighty, let's go and take our quiz then. All right. So the origin, is it the stationary bone or the movable bone? Stationary, just think origin, that's where it starts. And the insertion, that's the movable bone. So if you're thinking about all the muscles of your arms and your legs, is the origin usually more proximal or more distal? It would be proximal, right? And then the insertion is going to be distal for all like it's kind of one way to think about it. What's the correct name for the muscle known as your bottom? Your gluteus maximus, or if you're like one of my students from last semester, she said when she was in 3rd grade, she called it her gluteus beauteous. And thought she was like the funniest person in the world. It's pretty fun. And then which of these is part of your leg? Was it external oblique, pectoralis major, triceps, or tibialis anterior? So tibialis anterior, and part of your arm? It's the triceps there. All right, sweet. So I figured chapter 10 was hard enough. We could have chapter 11 be sort of easy. So chapter 10, part 2, we just had a few slides to finish about muscle fatigue. So wait a second. So if you're doing bicep curls or pull downs or whatever, no matter what you do, at some point there's just a time where you cannot do it anymore. No matter how much you're telling your arm to keep lifting that weight, it's not going to do it anymore. So that's muscle fatigue. It's not necessarily your muscle sore or something, although that's probably going to happen. It just means it can't contract anymore. So kind of a surprise, but scientists don't actually know what the exact reason for that is. We don't know what the signal is that actually makes your muscle not contract anymore. Some things that sort of make sense, and it's probably a combination of all of these, at least most of the time. Maybe you're not releasing calcium from the SR anymore. And if you remember, that was the signal to make tropomyosin move out of the way so myosin could grab actin. So if you're not releasing calcium anymore, actin's going to be all covered up, and you can't contract the muscle. Or maybe you're just out of ATP. So no oxygen, no nutrients, no ATP. What stage of that contraction's affected if you're out of ATP? Remember what ATP did? Do it? Yeah, the myosin heads wouldn't energize anymore. That'd be one. Buildup of lactic acid could signal somehow to stop everything because you're doing fermentation there. Or maybe you're out of neurotransmitter. So you remember that very first step of making a contraction was the nerve releasing neurotransmitter. And it went over to this muscle cell and started the whole cascade of events. So maybe you're out of neurotransmitter. So your brain's telling the nerve to send a signal, but that nerve's used up all its neurotransmitters, so it can't send the signal to the muscle anymore. So probably a combination of all of those. Interesting. So the answer for that one, what do you think? All right, so 60% for E. I would say E is probably the best answer. We didn't talk a lot about central fatigue, but that is another aspect of muscle fatigue. All right. So onward to chapter 11. All right, so hopefully reading through the chapter, you got sort of the main point of how muscles do produce movement. So chapter 10, we spent all that time talking about, the molecular shortening and how the cells shorten. So you have to think, for a muscle, it's all the cells put together. So if all the cells are shortening, the muscle shortens. And obviously that muscle is going between two bones or between two tendons, which is probably more accurate. And if it shortens, it's going to pull on the tendon, which pulls on the bone. And now it's closer together because it's shorter. And that's happening anywhere your muscles are contracting, any movement of any of your body parts. So when contraction happens, what moves close? Does the insertion move closer or farther away from the origin? It's going to move closer, right? And you can actually think of your muscles and your joints as levers, which is why that was on there. So load, that's, for us, most of the time that's gravity pushing down on us. In order to counteract the load or to move your arm or your fingers, you need to put some effort into that system, which is the muscle contracting. And then they have to be connected somehow. So that's the fulcrum that connects it. So in this one, this is like a bicep curl. Your elbow's the fulcrum. The load is like the weight of gravity on your arm. And then the effort would be your bicep contracting. All right, so we've got 3 different types of levers in our body. You could see a few examples up there, first, second, and third class. I'm going to have you fill in a table in a moment, but what's different about them is the order. So like where the fulcrum is it in the middle? Is it at one of the ends? The effort and the load, are they in the same direction or opposite directions? And so third class lever was the one we just looked at, like a bicep curl, because you've got the fulcrum at one end, and then the effort, and then the load, and the effort and the load are in opposite directions. And a third class lever out in your life is tweezers. If you think about that, if you're trying to grab something with tweezers. The load would be pulling down, and then you would be providing the effort, like pushing that bottom thing of the tweezer up. Second class, that's like a wheelbarrow, or contracting your, what muscle is that? Your gas trucks, going on your tippy toes. That's second class lever. And then first class lever, moving your jaw up and down there. Two questions, and then we'll get to the table. So what were the joints? Were they load, resistance, fulcrum, force, or effort? All right, so C is the answer. It is the fulcrum. The joints are the fulcrum. What are the muscles? All right, so the muscles are the effort. Are exactly right, it is E. All right, so with your group, I got just a simple little table for you to fill in for the 3 levers, and I'll put this one back up there. Yeah. All right, let's make sure you got those. For first class, you've got the fulcrum in the middle, effort, load, and effort and load are going in the same direction. So an example of that is scissors. Or in our case, actually moving your jaw up to chew would be a first class lever, because you're pulling, on the back, pulling down on the back, which pushes the front up. That's what you're doing there. And we're going to talk about those muscles today, actually. The muscles of mastication. Second class goes effort, load, fulcrum. Effort and load are in opposite directions. And then the third class, fulcrum, effort, load. Effort and load are in opposite directions there as well. So anyways, those are your 3 types. Got them all over your body. All right, so this is kind of like we discussed towards the beginning of class. And I think the interesting thing to note is the muscles do go across the joints. So for example, looking at our bicep here. Hold on, let me move that out of the way. So the bicep, it's attached to the scapula up there. That's the origin. to a tendon, and then it goes the muscle through another tendon, and then it's attached to the radius. So it's not like the muscle's attached to the shoulder and the elbow. That wouldn't make quite as much sense, so maybe that's kind of what you think. It's attached to the bones on either side of the joints, basically. Which makes sense because you're not trying to move your joint, you're trying to move the bones on the other side of it, right? So if we shorten up this bicep, it's going to pull on the tendon right here, which is going to pull on the radius and move the whole lower arm closer. And then you also have, on the other side, you're talking about your triceps. It's coming from the scapula and the humerus and down to the ulna there.
So the biceps not on your humerus at all?
Not exactly, not really.
So if you're asking us what the origin is, then would we put the joint, or would we put like the bone that
You'd put the bone that it connects to. So the origins and the insertions are the bones themselves. All right. All right, so I'm going to put some answer choices in a second. But I want to know when the bicep contracts, which of these happen? So take a couple seconds, think about what's going to happen when this bicep contracts. All right, so what do you think? All right. So the answer is B there. And some people may have been tempted by D there. What would happen if your tricep was opposing the movement of your bicep? Wouldn't be able to move it. Because as you started contracting your bicep, if your tricep contracted, it's going to pull it back down. What is happening to the tricep, do you think? A little bit, at least. It's going to relax, at least a little bit. Although that's probably not the best example because it's not having to relax too much, but a little bit. And that kind of gets us to our coordination. So anytime you move any of your body parts around, there's always at least two different muscles that are engaged there. The agonist is the one that's contracting and causing the action. The antagonist is the one that's stretching in response to the other one contracting. And then the synergist, that'll stabilize like the intermediate joints. So for example, if you're, trying to move your fingers, you've got some muscles that contract that keep your wrist from moving all over the place. Because you just want to move your fingers, you don't want to move everything. So that's kind of what the synergists and also the fixators do. And the fixators are a little more specific. They stabilize the origin. For example, when we did our bicep curl, do you see anything else moving in my body? So there's muscles up here that are stabilizing the shoulder, the scapula to keep it from moving. Because if you just contracted the bicep without stabilizing everything it's attached to up here, all this stuff would start moving too. So those are the fixators. So I put up here the proximal ends of the limbs very often. And this is a pretty long movie. It's like 8 minutes, but it's really helpful kind of lecture with visuals about each of those things if you're struggling at all. Although in the study guide, the only thing for those is just to give a definition for them, so I don't need to spend a whole lot of time on that. All right, so what's the muscle that acts as a blank? That stabilizes the origin of the prime mover so it can act more efficiently. All right, so C is the answer there. That is the fixator. All right, so how about this one? When you do a bicep curl, what is the triceps acting as? So agonist, antagonist, synergist, fixator, or flexor? All right, so what should I come up with? B and C. So the answer for this one is actually B, the antagonist. So when you do your bicep curl, the tricep is relaxing. That's all it's doing. All right, so another movement. When you extend your lower arm, what is the triceps doing? So that's this movement. Extension. Extension. And now it's an agonist all of a sudden. Does that seem kind of weird? So it's the movement that matters. So basically all the muscles in your body, they could be a prime mover, they could be an antagonist, could be a fixator. It just depends on what the movement is. It's not like they're a permanent agonist all the time. What's the bicep when you do this? Sorry, when you do this, when you extend. It's the antagonist. So it's kind of cool if we use this as our example. When you do your extension, the tricep shortens, and it's pulling actually on the ulna to straighten your arm. It's pulling it back closer. It's a little hard to imagine, right? But you've got a tendon coming kind of under from the tricep to the front here. And when you contract your tricep, it's actually pulling that ulna closer. And then the bicep is relaxing. But which muscle's bigger, bicep or tricep? Usually it's your bicep that's bigger. Or stronger, I guess I should say. So you think about what, which can you do more of, like a bicep curl or like pulling down like this? Right? It's like I'd say around 2 times as much, depending on how trained you are. Pretty crazy. Right. So you already studied where all the muscles are that are on that study guide. But if you're ever confused or not sure, it's a good link to go to. Because it's just like the bone one where you can click on the name and it'll point to it, show you everything. All right. So I picked out a few to go into, including the muscles of mastication. And all the muscles, they have some specific action. And what an action is what the muscle does when it contracts. So, and what do muscles do? They move bones. So your action is always moving some bone or body part. So the masseter muscle of mastication, it elevates your mandible or closes your jaw, right? The temporalis does the same. It elevates your mandible, and it also retracts it. What do you think retracted mandible is? What movement is that? Oh, that's elevating. What do you think retracting it is? So that's make yourself have an overbite. You move your bottom teeth forward and back. So the retracting is when you're moving your bottom teeth in a little bit compared to your front teeth. So can everybody do an overbite? Don't look at your neighbor. It's embarrassing. So that's retracting it. And then our next one, the medial pterygoid, like pterodactyl, that's protracting your mandible. What do you think that is? That's your underbite. Put that lower jaw out a little bit. Obviously, your jaw doesn't go too much in and out, right? But you can tell from that overbite, underbite thing, you can move it back and forth, or in and out a little bit. Also, that pterygoid moves the mandible from side to side. You can like move it from side to side down there. And then if you notice, we only have one muscle that moves our mandible down. Why do you think you only need one muscle that does that? Which way is gravity pulling on your, it's pulling down, right? Also, what do you mostly need force for? Chewing, right? It's not like you have to force your jaw open so much. And that's probably true of nearly every animal you can think of. The muscles closing the jaw are a lot stronger than opening it. So if you've seen them like close like a crocodile's mouth or something, you're able to hold it closed almost because they don't have a super strong muscle that opens it. Whereas they've got enormously strong muscles to close that jaw. So you can't hold it open, but you could hold it closed. So interesting. And just to give you an idea of where those muscles are, temporalis up in the temple, there's your masseter, and there's the lateral and the medial pterygoid mastication muscles. If anyone out there's had issues with like grinding teeth at night or TMJ pain, that's where these muscles just get, overworked while you're sleeping. You're grinding your teeth, making them work, and then you wake up and they're all sore and you've got a headache and everything. That's these muscles. Right. So we have some fun stuff to do, so we'll just go through this sort of fast. And that's the origin, insertion, action of a bunch of the leg muscles. So you have this for your reference. So the gastroc, that's your calf in the back. It's attached to the femur, and then it's attached way at the heel bone down at the bottom. And the action is going on tippy toes, or plantar flexion. So it's going up like that. And then you have your gracilis, which is attached to the hip, origin, insertion on the tibia, and it adducts your thigh. What does thigh adduction look like? Anybody remember? Is it going towards your body or away from it? Right? So if you started, out here and you pulled it in, that'd be your grass. Or your gracilis there. Your quads, where are your quads at? Right in the kind of front, top of your leg there. Attached to the femur, and then attached to the patella and the tibia. And that's to extend your lower leg at your knee. Everybody extend your lower leg. That's your quad there, like you're kicking a soccer ball or something like that. Then you have your bicep femoris attached to the hip, insertion, fibula, and tibia, and it flexes your leg. So when your leg was out straight and you flexed your lower leg, that's your bicep femoris activating there. And we have a few others. The tendinous starts at the hip, inserts in the tibia. It also flexes your leg. So nearly the same as the bicep femoris and also the semimembranous. It has the exact same as the semitendinous. So hip, tibia, flexes the leg at the knee joint as well. So lots of muscles in the leg there. All right. So to practice all this business, in pairs, so with one partner, you're going to come up, pick one of the muscles that's on your study guide, and decide what movement that is. If it contracted, and then write down the origin, insertion, and action. And then you're going to quiz some other people in a little bit. So pick something from the study guide. If you need to look in the book for origins or insertions, certainly could. Alrighty. So I want to take a moment to talk about studying. When's your test?
Next Tuesday.
Nice try. It is on Thursday, not next Tuesday like AJ said. Do I? Yeah, so be a regular paper test, just like the last one. You'll be able to get some bonus points with your group after you're done. And advice for studying, print out a blank study guide. You should be able to answer most of it without looking at anything. You want to be an active studier, so if you made note cards, don't just read them. Quiz yourself with them. I had someone yesterday look at me like I was crazy, like, oh, that's what you use note cards for. Not just to read them. You could use them to quiz yourself. Also, I have plenty of office hours tomorrow or Thursday before your test. If you want to come in and show me anything or ask me about anything, it could be very helpful. So make sure you know that study guide. 3 chapters, especially number 10. Yes?
I don't know any of them.
Definitely need to study those if you don't know.